This lecture will give you an overview of the late Roman Empire, and by the end, you should have a better understanding of how the map of the Roman Empire was transformed from this large political unit in the 2nd century AD to a map that looks like this. You can see that the western part of the empire has been divided into smaller units ruled by various non-Roman groups, such as the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Franks, and Burgundians. Only the eastern part of the Roman Empire was not taken over by non-Romans, and historians refer to the surviving eastern part as the Byzantine Empire, but the inhabitants still called themselves Roman. This lecture will help to explain how all of these changes happened during the 3rd to the 5th centuries AD. Let's start with the Goths. You can see from the map that two groups of Goths, the Ostrogoths shown in green and the Visigoths shown in red, end up controlling large portions of the former Western Roman Empire. The Goths are a term that we use to describe various tribal groups that may have originated in the area of modern-day Poland or possibly from Scandinavia. There's not much known about their origins because they did not keep written records. Most of what we know about them comes from Roman sources, recording raids and attacks by the Goths starting in the 3rd century. This map gives the impression that there were invasions by unified groups of Goths, but instead there was a long series of raids, invasions, and migrations by different tribal groups. In some cases, the Romans allowed Goths to settle within the empire, usually in return for allegiance and military service. Many Goths were taken into the Roman army, which began to include more and more non-Roman soldiers during the course of the 3rd to the 5th centuries. This map also shows other groups such as the Franks, who will later move into the area of France, which is named after them, and also the Angles and Saxons, who will later invade Britain and give us the term Anglo-Saxon. In addition to facing the Goths on their northern border, the Romans were also experiencing trouble from a new empire, the Sassanids. The Sassanids were based in Iran, but shared a border with the Roman Empire in the area of Turkey, Armenia, and Syria. The Romans had previously fought with the Parthian Empire, which had been located in the same region in the Middle East, and the Sassanids took over power in this region from the Parthians. In the 3rd century, the Sassanids started to move across the border and attempted to take over land in Syria and Turkey. The red lines on this map show the Sassanid attacks extending into the area of Antioch, which both the Romans and the Sassanids very much wanted to control. In many different areas of history, this was a contested region because it's so strategic in terms of trade and communication routes. The Sassanids would continue to be a threat to the Byzantine Empire until the 7th century, but at the same time there was also trade and interaction between these empires. The 3rd century was generally a very difficult time for the Roman Empire, and it's surprising that the empire did not completely collapse at this time. Historians have labeled this as the crisis of the 3rd century. In addition to the invasions that I've just mentioned, there were also natural disasters such as droughts, as well as plague and famines. This was also a very unstable time politically, with frequent military coups and assassinations of the emperors. Few emperors were able to rule long enough to make any lasting improvements. Many aspects of civic administration and upkeep of the infrastructure of the empire began to be neglected as more and more money was spent on the army. Finally, in 285 AD, the Emperor Diocletian managed to improve the situation. He made a peace treaty with the Sassanids and made a series of reforms to the administrative, legal, and economic systems. One of the attempted changes was the division of the empire into 4 large units, each governed by one of 4 tetrarchs, which you can see pictured in the sculpture. Instead of one emperor attempting to control the entire territory, there were 2 senior emperors and 2 junior emperors. Diocletian himself ruled in the eastern area, shown on the map in purple, which had long been one of the wealthiest part of the empire, especially Egypt. Diocletian also started one of the harshest periods of Christian persecution, known as the Great Persecution. The tetrarchy did not last long, and following a civil war among the tetrarchs, the Emperor Constantine took power again as a single ruler of the entire empire. Constantine is also considered a Christian saint because he converted to Christianity. He also made Christianity a legal religion within the empire, and the persecution of Christians stopped. Constantine also moved the capital of the empire to the city of Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, or the city of Constantine. There were probably several reasons for this move, including the relative safety of the location, but also that the emperor could move quickly with an army to either the northern border, which continued to see trouble from Goths and other Germanic tribes, or to the southwestern border with the Sassanids. Constantine had made Christianity a legal religion, but traditional Roman religion, or so-called paganism, remained strong. It was the Emperor Theodosius in 391 AD who outlawed other Roman religions, and many temples and cult statues were destroyed at this point. In some cases, such as the temple to Aphrodite at Aphrodisias in Turkey, shown on the left, temples were converted into churches. Often the statues of the Roman deities were destroyed, but sometimes they were carefully buried, such as the statue of Artemis at Ephesus, shown on the right. Perhaps the people who buried the statue were hopeful that someday they would be able to dig it up and restore it to her temple. By this time, Christianity had become more organized and also more hierarchical, and this will continue to be important for later European history. You may have heard these terms before, but let me review them briefly. A priest is a religious official and spiritual leader who is appointed to a specific church or Christian community. A bishop has authority over many priests within a wider district, and usually bishops were located within a major city. Certain bishops had greater authority than others, and these were located at Jerusalem, Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch. Following the expansion of Islam into the areas of Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria, the cities of Rome and Constantinople were left as the 2 centers of Christian authority. The Bishop of Constantinople is known today as the Patriarch, and the Bishop of Rome is the Pope. During the Middle Ages, there began to be disagreements between the Eastern and Western authorities, and eventually there was a split between the Catholics under the authority of the Pope and the Orthodox Christians under the authority of the Patriarch. In the 5th century, Rome was about to face a series of attacks. The first shock came in 410 when the Visigoths invaded and sacked Rome. This was the first time that Rome had been successfully attacked in almost 800 years of its power. In the years following this attack, the Romans tried to incorporate the Visigoths into the empire by granting them status as foederati. As foederati, they were given land in France in return for serving in the Roman army, and you can see the original area of their habitation in the dark orange color. Eventually, they broke away from Rome, and the area became the kingdom of Theodoric II, described in the reading by Sidonius that we will be discussing in class. Later in the 5th century, the Visigoths also extended their power into Spain. One of the reasons that many Goths were pushing into the Roman Empire in the 5th century is because they themselves were being pushed by the new empire of the Huns. The Huns also began to attack the Roman Empire, and one of the approaches that the Romans used with the Huns was to pay them, usually in gold, if they would agree not to attack. This system worked well as long as the Romans kept paying, and eventually the Romans were paying the Huns a yearly tribute to keep them away. This attests both to the weakening of the Roman army in that they were not willing to go directly against the Huns, but also the continued wealth of the empire. In 455, a new group of invaders known as the Vandals once again attacked and sacked Rome. The Vandals were another Germanic tribe among others that were pushing into the Roman Empire from the north. In the 5th century, the Vandals established a kingdom in the area of North Africa. This is an area that had originally been part of the Carthaginian Empire before it had been taken over by the Romans. The Romans tried to win back this territory, but were unsuccessful. 476 AD is a date I had to memorize in high school as the end of the Western Roman Empire. It's the date when the last Roman emperor in the West resigned his power to a Germanic king named Odoacer. He did not remain king for long, and soon Italy was taken over and ruled by the Ostrogoths. It should be stressed again that the eastern part of the Roman Empire did not fall at this time, but continued for almost another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire. But in the west, we can see how the territory and borders have changed. The Ostrogoths, shown in green, are controlling Italy, and the Visigoths, shown in red, are in southern France and Spain. The Vandals are in North Africa, shown in purple. You can also see the Franks living in the area of France in blue, and the Burgundians, another tribal group, in dark red. Most people living in the former western area of the empire probably did not notice any major change in their lives after 476 AD, because these various Germanic groups had been coming into the empire for several centuries at this point and had created mixed populations in these areas. This mixed culture will still retain elements of Roman civilization well into the Middle Ages, which is the next period that we will be studying.